My name is Barney Rosenberg, and before we introduce ourselves as judges, here are the ground rules for this presentation. In this part of the competition, you are taking on a fictional business identity and assigning a fictional business identity to us, the judges. Please make sure everyone knows who you are and who we are before you begin. You will have 25 minutes to describe the legal, financial, and ethical dimensions of the problem and to recommend a solution that passes muster on all three counts. During this time, the teams will not be interrupted. When you're finished, the judges will ask you questions for 10 or 15 minutes. Then we will all take a deep breath, relax, and we can give you some feedback, and you can ask us any questions you like. But during the formal Q&A, we will stay in our rules as you assign them, as will you. So with that having been said, my name again is Barney Rosenberg. I am a lawyer by training and experience, trying hard to retire. For the last 15 years, though, I was the global ethics officer for a British company in the aerospace business. And that accounts for a fair amount of my travel. Jeff?
Hi, you guys. My name is Jeff Thies. I'm a clinical faculty at LMU. I come to LMU from a background in business. I was an applied ethics executive for St. Joseph Health, which is a multi-state integrated healthcare system in Southern California. And prior to that, I was a direct marketing executive. Currently, I also am the director for the Institute for Business Ethics and Sustainability. So I'm very excited that you're participating in this competition and really excited to be able to share this experience as a judge as well. So great to meet you.
Okay, so just started the clock going. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening. We are Helios International. Let me introduce our team. My name is Alex Zinin, and I will be discussing the background and current situation in South Sudan, as well as our proposal. Jake will be covering ethics, followed by Taylor and Thomas, who will be discussing the legal and financial viability of our project. We are thankful for the opportunity to talk to you, South Sudan's Ministry of Electricity and Dams. We would like to present you a business sustainability plan for the future of energy in your nation. We plan to utilize solar technologies to improve water and electricity quality in South Sudan. We will be converting photovoltaic solar panels to be water safe. They will float on bodies of water near impoverished communities. This will not only produce much needed affordable electricity for the communities, but will also help limit deforestation. Our agenda consists of covering an overview of South Sudan, followed by ethical consideration, then legal issues, financial analysis, and lastly, recommendations. Our plan covers two sustainable development goals: affordable and clean energy, and sustainable cities and communities. We have taken into account many current problems of South Sudan. As you may already know, South Sudan gained independence in 2011, making it the youngest country in the world. It is also the least electrified country in the world, according to the World Bank. South Sudan fell into civil war shortly after its independence. Civil war has destroyed much of South Sudan's limited infrastructure, triggering an economic implosion. This war has decimated social services and destroyed infrastructures. In regard to sustainable goal of affordable and clean energy, we see 80% of South Sudan's nation using biomass to fuel homes electrically. At the moment, an average family spends 1/3 of their weekly funds for electricity. As we look into the sustainable cities and communities goal, there's a push in South Sudan's government to implement more innovative ways to provide job opportunities for citizens. An example of this is by developing safety precautions within the communities. To be able to fix South Sudan's conditions, it is important to view its problems. The civil wars that have been occurring over the years have caused 4 million people to flee from their homes and 2.47 million to flee into neighboring countries since 2014. Over 7 million people need humanitarian assistance, and around 6.9 million are experiencing hunger, based on the Mercy Corps and World Health reports in 2019. People being away from their homes hurts the agricultural industry, which many people depend on as a primary food source for survival. Food stores are running out of supplies, and the markets are empty as well. the South Sudanese who live within humanitarian camps experiencing overcrowding and poor sanitation. The camps do not have the resources to sustain a large number of people, and they do not have resources to sustain them for a long period of time. South Sudan depends entirely on imported diesel to run generators for electricity. By introducing the floating panels, it will allow a cheaper energy alternative for 43% of the South Sudanese who live within less than $1.43 a day. Only about 1% of South Sudan's 12.5 million people have access to the electrical grid. Our solution is to introduce the floating solar panels and install them along the White Nile River and other bodies of water. This provides the use of solar farms that do not require deforestation. Its benefits include, but are not limited to, limiting the deforestation. It includes, but are not limited to, improving citizens' well-being, preventing water evaporation, keeping water free of mosquitoes, which reduces illnesses, eliminating malaria and bacteria, and even providing work opportunities for the installation of the solar panels. By providing a sustainable energy source to South Sudan, it can open up a business expansion by enabling businesses to be open into the night. It can benefit education by allowing the access of the internet to come into play by eliminating the distance children must travel for education. This past year, the education system has proven that students are able to learn in a remote location. It can also diversify South Sudan's revenue. We are aware of South Sudan environment audit. It accesses the commitment to government and how it is trying to establish a transparent and sustainable energy industry. South Sudan is aware that investors are becoming hesitant to invest in fossil fuel projects due to transition in renewable energy. South Sudan is utilizing environmental aspects, renewable, environmental stability and safety as a driving force for investment. By implementing a new source of energy, this opens up doors to economic diversification and can essentially improve the standard of living in South Sudan. Now I'll pass it on to Jake, who will cover the ethics.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everyone. My name is Jake Holland. Today, I'll be bringing you through the ethical aspects of our solution of floating solar panels in South Sudan. So, as we all know, South Sudan is currently facing an ethical crisis few, if any, other countries have faced. One of the largest crises being the lack of access to power. With only about 1% of South Sudan's population connected to the power grid, people have turned to other ways of generating electricity without access to clean and renewable energy. South Sudan cannot be prosperous and ethical without the use of widespread clean electricity in their nation. So, obviously, people have turned to new forms of energy if they cannot access the electrical grid. The two main sources of power citizens are using are diesel generators and burning wood. First, we'll talk about the diesel generators. These noisy generators have in themselves created a black market in South Sudan, where sellers charge about 5 times the typical cost per gallon for diesel. Over time, this will cripple South Sudan's new economy on top of pumping harmful fumes and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Next, the wood burning. As of June 2018, fuel wood and charcoal account for over 80% of all wood use in South Sudan. This is culminating in a 1.5 to 2% deforestation rate per year. With just these two statistics alone, it's clear that South Sudan's lack of energy is sending them into total environmental freefall. Unfortunately, this is not the only ethical issue that you are facing. For a moment, we need to ask ourselves, why is access to energy so important? The people of South Sudan are paying exorbitant amounts of money and cutting and burning their own forests. For what reason? It's simple. Electricity allows for a better quality of life. With electricity, there's an easier access to education and easier ways to cook and clean food and water. South Sudan is facing a myriad of ethical dilemmas: lack of access to clean water, lack of education, high nighttime crime rates, little to no infrastructure, high rates of disease such as typhoid fever, malaria, and hepatitis A and E, just to name a few. These are serious issues that concern every South Sudanese citizen, but without access to electricity, combating these unethical issues becomes almost an insurmountable task. So, the current solution people of South Sudan have turned to is clearly unethical. Black market extortion and deforestation should not be the people's only hope for energy. And if you think that electricity is not a necessary human right, then I ask you, why are the people of South Sudan going so far out of their way to obtain it? Not only do people need electricity for day-to-day use in South Sudan, but we cannot enact widespread, lasting ethical solutions to these issues without electricity. South Sudan is currently in an ethical crisis, one that cannot be solved without widespread access to electricity. On top of this, the solution that the South Sudanese people have turned to is also highly unethical. So, is South Sudan facing an ethical dilemma? Simply put, yes. Now that we've identified that we have a problem, it's time to talk about our solution. People in South Sudan need electricity, not only electricity, but a clean and sustainable way of obtaining it. This is where Helios International recommends floating solar panels. Solar panels are a clean form of renewable energy. The only unethical side of solar energy is the typical deforestation needed to create solar farms. However, this becomes a non-issue when placing them on bodies of water. Not only does this save land from being turned into a solar farm, but keeps the panels cool, allowing for increased efficiency at no extra cost. On top of combating deforestation, these floating solar panels will also work to keep water free from algae blooms and bacteria growth, and mosquito eggs. It does this by preventing excess light from entering the bodies of water, limiting a vital food source for algae and bacteria. It also continuously moves on the water, preventing still standing water, which is where mosquitoes like to nest. This will help limit the transmission of blood transmitted illnesses. These floating solar panels will be placed on bodies of water that surround nearby communities. The power would then be run into homes and community centers, allowing for access to the electrical grid. The benefits of this are long-reaching. This should allow for cheap, clean energy, helping to combat global warming while also curtailing the black market and deforestation in South Sudan. This limited deforestation alone will improve the overall water and soil quality. The panels will also allow for things like streetlights to be set up, helping to bring down the aforementioned high nighttime crime rates. Access to this grid will allow people to use more reliable means of cleaning water and cooking food. This should work to fight some of those food and waterborne illnesses I mentioned before. And while on the topic of illnesses, clean water and reliable power will allow for a more reliable mixing of medicines, which will go on to help bolster public health. All of these unethical issues solved through the use of the highly ethical solar panels. So, floating solar panels are a non-intrusive, clean, renewable source of energy. They're an ethical source of power that can be expanded upon in years to come. They will also directly cripple the black market and limit deforestation. They will also allow for electricity to be quickly and cleanly delivered to communities. This will directly lead to cleaner food and water as they can be reliably boiled and cooked. But on top of all of this, by addressing the issue of energy first, South Sudan works to expedite the process of solving its myriad of other ethical dilemmas. The 21st century has brought us countless new technologies, so let's use them to give developing nations like South Sudan a leg up. The ethical issues that South Sudan are facing are complex. Lack of energy, unclean food and water, widespread disease, high nighttime crime rate, and a black market are only a few, and all of them are hard to tackle. We at Helios International believe that by investing in floating solar panels, we will help solve a lot of these unethical issues by supplying power to the country. Also, these solar panels in and of themselves are highly ethical with no unethical side effects. Clean, renewable energy is the first step to building a prosperous and ethical South Sudan. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Thomas, who will cover some of the more legal aspects for you today.
Thank you, Jacob. Hi, my name is Thomas Leon, and I will focus on the legal aspects of South Sudan and implementation of floating solar panels. Before I get into the specifics, it is important to understand the government system South Sudan currently has and to make sure everyone is on the same page. As spoken about before, South Sudan is currently recovering from the civil wars that have plagued the young nation over the past decade. With the nation moving on from this after a peace agreement in February 2021, there has been a focus on creating a more centralized and stronger government and judicial system as they implemented a pluralist legal system that is based on common law. The reasoning for a pluralist legal system is because of the transitional constitution, and that says that there are different sources of law, like the constitution itself, written laws, and ethical tribes laws and customs. Government itself is set up with some similarities to the United States, with a president, a legislator, and judicial courts with Supreme Court. One of the issues that hurts the authority of the government is that the country is changing so rapidly that many old laws are changing and outdated and that new ones are forming. Also, the strength of the courts is limited due to the inexperience and knowledge of the laws by the officials, the slow process of implementing new laws, and the language barrier of English. When it comes to the implementation of a floating solar panel power grid, there are no previous cases or lawsuits that could possibly affect the development of them. One of the most important ways the government can build a floating solar panel power grid is by gaining trust and building relationships with international countries, companies, and foreign investors. This will help fix the main problem of implementing the power grid, which is funding. A great country that would be the most beneficial to become South Sudan's ally is a financial powerhouse that is China. China is the sole leader in solar power technology with about 83.4 billion US dollars invested into it. They are also heavily involved with investing in Africa as a whole, as they are one of the leading countries in the world with about $60 billion invested in 2018. With their aid, technology, and manpower, as well as other investors like the United Nations, South Sudan will be able to give its people power when 99% of them do not have any electricity and rely on diesel for those who can afford it. So piggybacking off the previous point, it would be in South Sudan's best interest to also allow for neighboring countries' solar panel companies to come in and help build this power grid. The industry and push for solar panels have been on the rise over the past few years, and many companies have been sprouting up and ready to install the solar panels. The government can hire some of these companies that can install the solar panels for smaller communities in the country, as they offer up to about 150 watts of power. And this might not seem like a lot of watts, but it is all the communities that South Sudan really need to power their appliances like refrigerators, freezers, and radios. What is a known problem is the expensive price of solar panels, but what South Sudan absolutely benefits from is the overall decreasing price over the years of solar panels, as the technology, the know-how, the production, and implementation of them are becoming easier and cheaper. By allowing these companies and countries to come in, it will increase technological knowledge other than solar panels, like helping create jobs and increasing labor productivity. Both of these points, the most important first step to receiving help and aid from international and neighboring countries and companies is to gain their trust. If South Sudan is not looked at as a country that is trying to move on from its disruptive past and into the world technology and environmental friendly ways, it will not receive the critical funds it needs to kickstart the process forward. By formulating a plan to build not just a solar power grid, but a floating one, that is a great first step. So a way that they can improve is by doing an environmental audit. What this entails basically is inspecting their oil plants, collecting data, and planning out the solar power grid correctly. They did an environmental audit in January of 2021, then there were protests about that the oil plants were damaging the environment. By doing an environmental audit, it will ensure that the plan will benefit South Sudan, not just environmentally, but financially, because being able to produce oil helps finance the country, as well as jobs and revenue. This is because oil is about 90% of the government's revenue and 97% of exports, as it has the third largest oil reserve in sub-Saharan Africa at about 3.5 billion barrels of oil. Even though using fossil fuels such as oil is not good for the environment, it is important that the economy of South Sudan in the short run and showing the world that they can balance solar power energy and conventional oil. By balancing the two, they express their desire to move forward with solar power and keeping the environment clean and healthy. Foreign investors will feel more optimistic about the outlook and future of South Sudan and will take their request for aid to build the solar power grid seriously. Diesel regulation is an action the government can take once implementation of the solar panels is starting to reach across the country. Some background first. Diesel is one of the main sources of power in South Sudan, and they usually power only really small residential generators that are expensive and hurt the environment. Only a fraction of the population had and used these generators anyway. So, as the floating solar panel power grid is developing and starting to become more operational, the government can pass incentives and phase out diesel out of South Sudan. The diesel that they currently use is mostly imported from neighboring countries like Kenya, who South Sudan gets about 32 million liters of diesel per month. Instead of importing that much, they will lessen the importation of diesel. This should not lead to a problem or a lawsuit with Kenya because the two countries are setting up pipelines across borders for crude oil so they can come up with an agreement to substitute the crude oil for the diesel. They can also incorporate a higher diesel tax from 5% to 7%, which will make diesel more expensive. You might think there would be a problem with the population about a tax since diesel is important for South Sudan other than for power, but now with the new oil refineries that are opening up due to the ending of the war, there will be a considerable amount of oil compared to before, which will be used as an alternate fuel source. Also, there are currently no environmental regulations or laws, and the only environmental protection they have is being a part of the Paris Climate Agreement. Passing environmental regulations could also help on top of the audits that do take place already. With all these factors, the solar panel electrical grid will power and excel South Sudan into a more functioning society. And now I'll pass it on to Taylor for the financial analysis.
Thank you, Thomas. Hi, my name is Taylor Trinidad, and I'll be discussing financial analysis and implementing solar panels within South Sudan. Solar power energy is a low-emission renewable energy source that relies solely on sunlight. South Sudan alone generates a minimum of 10 hours of sunlight daily, which essentially will not be a dilemma to power the panels. Nevertheless, the maintenance of these solar panels will require little to no maintenance. South Sudan experiences heavy rain, which will aid in removing excess debris. Furthermore, in moments of drought, the solar panels will require manual removal of debris. This will open opportunities for Sudanese citizens to take on positions in the maintenance of the solar panels. Furthermore, South Sudan experiences high climate temperatures, which will possibly overheat the panels. Helios International strategically proposes placing solar panels on the White Nile River, allowing airflow and circulation within the panels. Solar panel installation is the most expensive renewable energy source. However, funding this massive expense will cost the Sudanese government a one-time fee and develop new advancements for the country as well. These advancements include the amount of fossil fuels impacting the environment will decrease to 43% within a 2-year period of solar energy use. The amount of electricity usage for not just urban communities will begin to extensively benefit the healthcare and academic improvements of the Sudanese people. The country will decrease within 84% diesel usage to 32% within a 2-year period of solar energy usage. Now, you may be wondering how much this advancement will cost. Solar panel installation is centered on the amount of kilowatts of energy a specific area needs. In regards to South Sudan, the total amount of megawatts needed to fuel the entire country is 131.4 megawatts. Solar panel measurements are measured by the uses of kilowatts, to which in conversion will require 1 kilowatt per 1/10,000 megawatt. So South Sudan requires a total of 100,031 kilowatts. The typical solar panel rate in the United States is between 3,000 to 3,500 per kilowatt, but in South Sudanese pounds, roughly 455,000 per kilowatt. Essentially, it will cost approximately 455,000 per pounds to generate one solar panel, totaling to roughly approximately 55.6 billion pounds for the projected installation fee for the total range area on the White Nile. 3/4 of the South Sudanese population relies on the energy fuels from diesel generators. Big companies such as Juba Aquana Water Company rely heavily on a 1,500 vessel diesel generator that costs a total of 9.7 thousand per day for diesel alone. Approximately 293,000 pounds a month for diesel expenses for that company alone, and essentially 31.5 million pounds a year to fund the company with diesel expenses. The company will purchase 45,000 liters of diesel a month in order to maintain the business quota. The monthly cost to possess such generators will cost the company roughly 439 million pounds for diesel alone, which would total to roughly 5.2 billion pounds annually for one company within all of South Sudan. And water and oil companies are excessive within South Sudan. So just imagine the amount of companies that utilize that much money to fuel their companies. So it costs a lot of money. Helios International projects that the cost to be roughly approximately 55.6 billion pounds for the installation fee alone. This is 10 times the annual fee Juba Aqua Water Company pays annually. Typically, this price is not ideal, essentially for a country with such economic hardships. However, the installation of these panels will open an array of possibilities for the Sudanese people. South Sudan has one of the most underdeveloped economies in the world. Annually, the country seeks outside funding from investors to assist in humanitarian expenses. In 2021, the South Sudan government focuses on their people's health and welfare to decrease the spread of disease and food insecurity. The country.
Excuse me for interrupting. You have 2 minutes remaining.
Okay. Okay, so the government, they're looking to fund this over a total of $120 million. China exports only from South Sudan in compensation for their financial funding for the several different factors. China has been an active investor of the South Sudan since 1995. One of the biggest investors of the South Sudan is China, due to the fact that over 100 companies within the Chinese section invest into South Sudan. Many investors have perceived South Sudan as an investor's paradise, meaning they receive vital resources from the country due to the fact of its infrastructure needs and limited competition within the Western Hemisphere. Nevertheless, China is the leading country with growing solar energy panels. China has the leading country to generate the most solar energy panel usage. Helios International proposes that China aids in the funding of this advancement. Approximately 3.3 billion Hong Kong dollars would cover the initial cost for these solar panels. Within our projection, if China was to fund at least 25% of the total installation fee by 2025, we spark the improvements of these 5 specific main sectors. Aiding in the renewable energy development of South Sudan will drastically improve the sustainability of the country. It will open up job opportunities for all Sudanese people, ranging from permanent to operational jobs in regards to maintenance and installation fees. I will pass it over to Jake to discuss our recommendations.
Thanks, Taylor. So
And
floating solar,
Jake, you're about out of time, so if you could
no problem.
finish up.
Yeah, so floating solar panels are a non-intrusive, clean, renewable source of energy. They're an ethical source of power that could be expanded upon in years to come. They'll directly cripple the black market and limit deforestation. They'll also allow for electricity to be quickly and cleanly delivered to communities. This will directly lead to cleaner food and water. By addressing the issue of energy first in South Sudan, it works to expedite the process of solving its myriad of other ethical issues. Helios International is pleased to suggest these recommendations to the Ministry of Electricity and Dams. We present these realistic, practical, and financially responsible recommendations in hopes of creating a brighter and more sustainable future for South Sudan. Thank you all very much for listening.
Well, and thank you. I do have a question. Has anybody else anywhere in the world used floating solar panels? And what's their experience been?
Yeah, so as of right now, we know that they're very, very limitedly used. Floating solar panels really are only used, I believe we found here in New Jersey. So essentially, it just aids, they use them on hydroelectric dams, and it just kind of aids in supplementing a bit of extra power. But we feel by refitting these and using them widespread across South Sudan, it'll really be able to kind of shift them away from diesel use and become kind of a new staple in kind of sustainable development.
Well, I worry a little bit about our neighbors to the north, Sudan and Egypt.
Of course.
And any impact it might have on the Nile River.
Yeah, so these floating solar panels are very, very minimally invasive. They float, they're literally built on platforms that float just on top of the water. So everything underneath is able to flow through. There's really no negative side effects except for killing anything harmful like excessive algae blooms. It'll prevent that, and kind of detrimental bacteria that would grow underneath. But other than that, wildlife and other plants and stuff, they can flow right through and be absolutely fine underneath the floating solar panels. They don't leach any toxins into the water, nothing like that. They're very safe, and they have a pretty long lifespan of about 25-ish years. So they can go a long time without being replaced.
We have a problem because we don't have enough energy at all, right? So do you think that we should implement the floating solar panels with a strategy of replacing our reliance on diesel and oil? Or do we need to implement the solar panels in addition to diesel and oil because our people are so underutilized, they have such limited access to energy anywhere?
Sure. And Thomas touched on this a little, so I'll pass it off to him in just a second. But definitely for the beginning period in South Sudan, there should be a strong transitional period, because you're not going to, convince all these people who are using diesel every day to go right to solar immediately. As well as solar, it is going to take a bit of time to install. So for a while, as Thomas said in his presentation, there should be a focus on both diesel and solar, but in the long run, it should be switched to predominantly solar energy. Thomas, I don't know if you have anything you want to add. That was.
Oh, no, I completely agree. It's more of implementing it implementing the solar panels slowly while we slowly phase out the diesel and oil. It's not going to be overnight where we put the solar panels in and take out diesel and oil. You know what I mean? The world is solely focused on using oil and diesel and other fossil fuels to maintain all their power. So being able to implement this to start now, because eventually these fossil fuels will end up running out. So what we want to do is start now, and we'll slowly build and build and build until there'll be more of a higher focus on solar power energy over the fossil fuel energy.
Okay, thank you. And Taylor, how much is it going to cost to start this?
It's gonna cost roughly $5.5 billion.
$billion.
Yes, billion
Okay.
dollars. Hong Kong, roughly, but in USD, it would roughly be $55 billion. But initial fee, just for the installation.
Okay. And the proposal is that China would underwrite this.
Yeah, so China's kind of the leader right now in solar panel technology, and they are currently heavily invested in Africa, a lot of South Sudan's neighbors. So in terms of looking at South Sudan, it would be economically viable for them to look at China, one, because they're the largest producer of solar panels current largest leader of solar technology, and they're already heavily invested in Africa. I think it's also important to note that South Sudan is sitting on one of the largest oil reserves in the world currently. And to see them squander that natural resource trying to power their country right now, instead of using that as a powerful trading tool to help them build up in the future, I think that's kind of a misstep. So kind of focusing on getting their power grid more sustainably focused so they can use that oil as a trading resource to help them build into the future.
So are you recommending that we buy solar panels from China based on our oil resources? Or
Yeah, I don't know if Thomas
recommending that
wants
they
to,
donate the solar panels?
yeah, I don't know if Thomas wants to speak a little more on that, but we're recommending that basically China and South Sudan kind of come together, and South Sudan uses its oil resources to kind of get these buy these solar panels from China. I don't know if Thomas has anything he wants to add there.
Yeah, so basically what would happen is the South Sudanese government will basically not take them, but will get the solar panels from China and the other neighboring countries on credit. And since the country right now is starting to open up oil refineries, when pumping the oil and getting all their oil reserves up, they're able to trade and pay back solar panels using the oil that they are able to frack up.
Okay.
You know, to say that China is heavily invested in Africa doesn't quite get it right. What they're doing is stealing resources. So they'll come into a country and they'll build a road in exchange for all the gold, or they'll build a port in exchange for other minerals that they need for their tech industries. Have we considered, or should we consider, competitive bidding here? Why just China?
Yeah, so right now we did come across this in our research. China has been invested, as you said, quote unquote, invested in South Sudan since 1995. We were kind of, as Helios International, we're kind of looking at this as more of renegotiating their current position with China, because China's not going anywhere in Africa, and South Sudan can really use these solar panels to beef up their infrastructure. So by kind of re-leveraging their position with China, they're able to hopefully increase their solar panel renewable production while also using their oil as a larger trading resource than actually using it.
Could we build our own solar panel industry?
In theory, yes.
License the technology?
That, I think in the short term, that would cost a lot more than South Sudan can currently afford. So potentially with expectation to transition into our own solar panel industry in the future. But in the short term, South Sudan is such a really brand new nation, as Alex said, really just coming out of the civil war in the last decade. So the infrastructure and everything to get that underway just isn't there yet, unfortunately.
I wonder if I could ask a little bit about the ethical dilemmas that you identified, because I'm hearing us landing in another dilemma while we're trying to solve the first one. So what you shared was we have this dilemma between the legitimate rights and needs of our people who, because of their lack of access to energy, are profoundly suffering in all of the ways that you really laid out and that we know in our hearts. So that's a real dilemma. And therefore we have this opportunity to resolve that dilemma by accessing solar panel technology. And that's a way that resolves this dilemma of environmental harm and all of the challenges that you talked about. But we're leveraging all of that based on oil revenue, which will create its own environmental harm, the carbon levels, CO2 levels, greenhouse gas emissions, all of these kinds of problems. And so how do you think through and resolve these competing dilemmas of dilemmas, if that question makes sense?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough question, but thank you for asking it. It really is hard, but the way we at Helios International are kind of looking at this is that there are current human lives that are, profoundly suffering, as you said. And while the world as a whole, involved in the Paris Climate Accords, are working to cut greenhouse gas emissions. So we're hoping that South Sudan can be at the forefront of that, use its oil in the short term while beefing up its kind of electrical grid to kind of work towards phasing out diesel as the rest of the countries in the world sort of work to phase out diesel and other, crude oils like that. But the way we're looking at it now is that there's a serious ethical dilemma going on with the people in South Sudan right now that needs to be addressed as quickly as possible before we can move towards doing that. Solar panels are great because they are able to, fight, as I said, the deforestation. They're able to directly work against the diesel generators that are being used right now. So it kind of works in the short term, but as you said, these are really, really tough ethical dilemmas going on. So it's definitely a tough question.
What's in it for Helios?
Helios International here we're a consulting agency. So we're just here to kind of work with the South Sudanese government and propose these solutions for them. So they would bring us on to kind of help them work through these solutions, navigate these kind of larger waters through, like we said, the ethical, legal, and financial dimension.
I loved your slides. I thought they were very compelling. The photo, first of all, where did you get the basic slide? It's beautiful.
Thank you. I created it on Canva. Yeah.
Excellent. And the photographs that you inserted in them really told a story in of themselves. A little bit of feedback for tomorrow's presentations. It's okay to slow down a little bit. You don't have to race through the material. Try to engage with the judges. Talk to us. We hired you to tell us what to do and to make recommendations. So take your time, persuade us, tell us. Good job.
Yeah, I really like the flow and the way in which you transitioned to one another. That was really good. The slides were also really good. Not just the creativity of the design, but you didn't overburden them with words. Sometimes when you're looking at slides, the readers are trying to figure out everything that's going on in the slide, and then you lose your audience, and that's something that you don't want to do at all. There was one slide at the beginning where you were really talking about solar panels, but the main picture was a river, and you really didn't talk about hydroelectricity or water. And so I didn't quite get how that connected with what you were saying at the time. So that was a little distracting, but that was only one small instance. For tomorrow, where you're going to focus on the ethical piece, I'd spend some time thinking about some of the questions I was asking about these intersecting dilemmas, because I think in the process of resolving a dilemma, you introduced a second dilemma. So it really is this question of how do you prioritize and how do you think through that? And you shared the classic developing country problem that it needs to build basic infrastructure to support the fundamental human needs of its people. But if it does that in a way that causes harm in order to mitigate harm, that's a real challenge. And that's kind of where you landed in that. So I think that's something to think through. The other thing that I liked a lot in your ethics presentation is you really anchored some of this in rights, that there's some, so it's just not that you know, there's a kind of a public works opportunity here for better efficiency, and or we could expand our you know, our electrical grid for all of the human benefits that are associated with that. But you started talking about the rights to health, the rights to safety, and that's a piece that you know, that connects with this too. And so I wanted to affirm that as a piece of what the presentation was too.